Get the after lunch topic. So everyone's late. I'd at least love to have folks, and I'm going to try out this feature to the chat box, to put into the chat box where you're from and what kind of animals you raise. That way, maybe we can talk about specifics at some point. And then I can check and see if I can see all the chats. So I do know yours, Carrie. Clemson and sheep. Awesome. Okay. Very cool. Cool. Cheyenne, I see you're from Oregon. That's where some of this meat stuff that I'm going to talk about actually originated. So the Good Meat Project primarily. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We've got some good people in your state. All right, well, I can definitely see that, Celise, so that's awesome. So I'll give people like 2 more minutes and then we'll start at 5 after and see who else we get to trickle in. For anyone else who just joined, if you can just help me out in the chat box and tell me where you're from and what type of animals you raise, that would be awesome. So maybe we can talk a little bit more specifically about a couple animals throughout the conversation. All right, cool. Well, I'm going to get started. I know some folks may still trickle in as well, and I'm going to try and keep tabs on my chat feature too, so we can answer questions throughout. I want to make sure I can. Cool. All right. Well, my name's Liz Riffle, and I am actually the owner of Riffle Farms. We actually raise bison out in Terra Alta, West Virginia, which is along the eastern border of West Virginia, kind of close over there to Maryland, Deep Creek, Maryland. And I started a sister company called The Honest Carnivore, which is a butchery class business that helps complete that transparency piece for consumers and farmers. So it gives farmers also another option to have their animals processed a little bit differently than just bringing them to the slaughter facility. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today. So like I said, I raise bison, and this slide here has got a good picture of me during one of our last classes that we just did last month, actually, for our annual bison roast. We also hosted a field harvest and carcass prep class with a group of folks. We had a little over 20 people up there. And that's my little one up there on my back. He's with me all the time. He's almost 2. He's my little farm boy, my farm hand. He's a good helper. So, but we are really committed to humanely harvesting our animals. And for me, that means field harvesting, because I feel like you get good meat out of a field harvested animal. So what really is humane field harvesting? We have great photos of it here now. Just this year, we started doing it on our farm. It took me about 3 years to work with the state of West Virginia to allow us to do this. But it's actually part of the reason why I even got into the bison business, because we'll continue to talk a little bit more about this, but bison are a non-amenable species, which means that they can be field harvested and still sold for commercial use. So when I was researching the industry many years ago and thinking about getting into farming, part of what prompted me to go into this business is because I was appalled by the factory farming system and how these farmers and basically big meat industry, keeps these animals and then basically throws them through a slaughterhouse on a conveyor belt. And, very little care is taken when the animals are, 1, raised, and 2, harvested. And I am an animal lover first and foremost. And I felt that that was really atrocious, and considered becoming a vegetarian myself. But I'm a meat eater through and through. I'm definitely a carnivore. So I thought that, there's got to be a better way here. And as I was doing that research and starting to connect with more farmers and more folks in the industry, more small farmers, I recognized that I could also be a part of that solution. And by, happenstance, came across, bison and bison meat during some of our travels across the nation, while my husband and I were active duty military, and found out that you could raise bison, and conveniently, I could also field harvest these animals, which means they never have to set foot in a slaughter facility. So it kind of all just came together beautifully at that point, and was really the sign that I needed to really move forward with raising my own humane meat. And there are a few people in this business. One of the books that I read in the beginning was Eating Animals by Jonathan Fower. He's got some great perspectives in his book about eating animals. It's just basically that simple, honestly. And he talks about the factory farming system. And this is one of those books that really made me look at, how we eat and what we eat in a whole different light. It's fascinating. And I highly recommend, if you haven't read it before, to go through this book. It's got some really great stuff in it. I pulled out a few of my favorite quotes in this. And really the one that sums everything up the best for me specifically as a carnivore and as a farmer is that third quote there on the slide. I'm just going to read it out to you. It's, as I see it, animals have entered into an arrangement with humans, an exchange of sorts. When animal husbandry is done as it should be, humane can provide animals a better life than they could hope for in the wild, and almost certainly a better death, which is quite significant. Their lives are taken for a purpose, and I think that's essentially what all of us hope for: a good life with purpose and an easy death. So I feel like, yes, I'm most definitely raising these animals for meat, but there's kind of an exchange of sorts right there, like there's a little bit more of a comfort level there, and I'm going to put them down in a comfortable manner as well, throughout the whole piece, their whole lives, start to finish. And a couple other people in these next coming slides that I have really found to be fascinating individuals in the industry that have really wonderful perspectives. Another one here is Taylor Collins, who actually even has he's a wonderful writer as well and has a little bit more of a poetic perspective. But he's actually one of the owners of the Epic Provisions, is, all those little bars that you can get at Whole Foods and things like that. So he helped to start that business and sold that, and now owns Rome Ranch, another big farm down in the Texas area. So, but I won't read you this slide, but it just kind of goes to show how poetic he can be in, the process of life and death, and what we're here to do as farmers. And if we eat meat, we can't just hide the fact that we have to kill the animal for that meat. So that cycle of life, death, and decay, and new life is really a big one for me. And he speaks about that a lot on his websites. And we've kind of made death a taboo thing in our country, in more recent times, because we've just kind of stepped away from what we used to do. And with small farmers and being in small communities and recognizing like where our cow actually came from and where that steak came from, a lot of us are now in cities and grow up in cities and don't even realize, where the egg comes from. So we've kind of moved so far beyond that, and now death is seen as a taboo thing to participate in. And so that's where a lot of people start having those issues with eating animals, and become vegetarian or vegan, to that point too. So kind of along those lines. So we used to know good meat. So since the beginning of time, right, we were either raising our own meat, or we were looking to somebody within the community to do that for us and do that well. There's a really great story out there by the Farmstead Meatsmith, Brandon, who talks about in one of his recent podcasts about, how housewives used to actually be the ones to inspect the meat at the butcher shop. And they wanted to see whole, or half carcasses and even primals hanging in the windows of these shops, because they knew what good meat looked like. They knew how long that carcass had been sitting there. Another thing they would do around the holidays, and especially Easter specifically, is the butchers would put Easter lambs out in the front cases, the entire lamb carcass and all of the organs. And they would pin up those organs in a way that showcased how well preserved that meat was, or how healthy that lamb was. And the housewives could tell by the liver of that animal how well that animal was raised. And they would pick out specifically which lamb they wanted to use for their, Easter feast and things like that. So we've really stepped away from this, though, because nowadays, Lord, most of us don't even have time to cook a meat for dinner. Never mind go to the butcher, figure out what we're going to cook, figure out how to cook it, how to cut it, and all that good stuff. And then on top of it, was it even good meat? Was it a good animal? So I love that small farmers like myself and Carrie, who's in this business with me as well, and on this Zoom call, we really get to have this hands-on experience and also give that back to our customers, which I feel like is what makes the biggest difference, not only in our small communities, but to the animals too, right? Like, we have these animals and there is a relationship there. And how do we honor that? I'm raising this animal, but I am going to eat you. And so we need to recognize that that entire life cycle has to be cared for in some manner. So another woman who I love, who's over in that Oregon area, I was saying earlier, is Camus Davis. She wrote a really great book that I read many years ago called Killing It, which is basically about how she learned firsthand going over to Europe. She was, a young woman trying to find herself and recognize that, our food system here in the United States was a little bit broken. And she wanted to learn more about, those old housewives who used to go around to the butcher shops and pick out good meat and good cheeses and, where all that good wine comes from and why was it so good and why did she feel like we were missing the mark on that in the United States. And so she went in search of that and then wrote a wonderful book, narrating that whole thing. She's a journalist by trade as well, so the book is very, very well written, just as a story in and of itself. Not even if you were a farmer or anything like that, it would apply to many people. But one of my favorite quotes from her in that book is, what do these labels, sustainable, local, humane, farm fresh, really mean? And do they really connect us to the thing itself, the act of killing and butchering an animal for dinner? If more of us were connected to the thing itself, how might each of us become a very different kind of meat eater? So that's what we try to bring to the customer through the Honest Carnivore and those butchery classes. Is I understand not everybody wants to be around for the harvesting of an animal, and that is totally okay. Not all of those classes do that. But all of the classes do have a butchery component because I want the consumer to know and understand what a carcass looks like, where that T-bone steak comes from. What is the weight of a liver in a pig? We're so removed from all those things. Never mind, people barely even know these animals have these internal organs that we don't eat over here. But there are countries and people for the longest time used to eat all of those organs because some of them are super rich in vitamins and nutrients and other minerals that we may not see in some of those other meats. But I want to reconnect the meat eater and the consumer with the thing itself, with that animal and what it actually takes to put that animal on the table. Because like I said, I'm a meat eater, I'm a carnivore, but I do think that, like myself, we would all become very different kinds of meat eaters if we truly understood the process and how it actually gets on our table. And I'm even one of those folks who is a proponent of eating less meat. I'm okay with that. You just need to eat better meat. You don't need to have meat for every single meal of every single day. We didn't used to do that up until maybe 80 years ago. That wasn't even an option because there wasn't enough meat around. But here comes, that factory farming industry, and magically we can put meat on the table 3 meals out of the day. But that was never an option for folks. We used to eat a lot more veggies and potatoes instead of all of that meat that I would say we put on the plate, and unfortunately also tend to waste. We can be very wasteful as a nation in regards to our food. And when it comes to wasting meat, that was a living animal. And so you're wasting that body and that flesh. And I have a hard time with that, as an animal lover, like I said. So building a meat collective is what we chose to do there with the Good Meat Project. Camus Davis is the owner of PDX Meats, which is over there in Oregon, Portland, Oregon, actually. And she started the Good Meat Project, which is basically a business model for folks to build their own local community meat collective. And if you go over to that website, goodmeatproject.org, you can see all of the other meat collectives that are all over the nation. Tennessee, Texas, Chicago, all over the West Coast, now in West Virginia. And she really helps you out to dial that in and see what the need is in your local community, and really helps you get that started up. And I've had a lot of conversations with her. She's a really fascinating individual and a brilliant mind in regards to not just, putting words down on pages, but, from the business perspective too. I really like her perspective on that, and has done some wonderful things in the Portland, Oregon area. And she's been doing this Good Meat Project for almost, I think it's been about 10 years now. So So she's been doing it for a little while. She's got some experience on that. So basically the Good Meat Project can potentially be your plan for getting a meat collective secured in your area. But not that you have to have a meat collective either. We're going to talk a little bit more about, still some of these loopholes that you can utilize without having to, open up your own business on that. But I did choose to do that. I did choose to start my own local meat collective in West Virginia. And that's, the Honest Carnivore right there. It's just a quick view of what my webpage looks like. And we did quite a few successful events this year. In the beginning, we were masking, and it was a little bit tougher because when you touch your meat, nobody else could bring home that meat. So we learned a lot through that aspect. But the other thing that's nice about some of this butchery stuff too is a lot of it happens on the farm, which already lends itself to being outdoors and having some space between individuals. So we actually saw quite an uptick in our class attendance, all throughout this year, which was a lot of fun to see. And we were excited to really chat with folks about some of this transparency stuff. It was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot about harvesting other animals because I do bison. But it was fascinating for me too, to be able to learn how to break down a pig and chickens. It's definitely a different process for each animal. So, so regulation wise, this is kind of the other piece of, getting into some of those loopholes that you can utilize in your own business without necessarily having to even create your own meat collective. But some of the current regulation right now is that the animals need to be examined prior to slaughter, because the thought was that would help to prevent some of the inhumane slaughter. So they want to make sure that animal is sound and it is not bleeding and it is not diseased for any reason. So for obvious reasons, if the animal looks diseased and you bring it into a facility, then it can spread whatever that is to other carcasses, or make the handler sick, et cetera. And then they want to make sure farmers are not bringing animals that are lame or injured in for slaughter for commercial use, because that has potential ramifications in and of itself as well. Like, well, what happened? Why is this animal bleeding? Things like that. So the regulation is there and is set up to kind of help with humane slaughter, but unfortunately kind of misses the mark on a few things. Another example is, on examination of carcasses, if you did, potentially bring in an animal that you didn't know was sick yet, you caught it. It's kind of like that window before you see any signs. But they did end up having a severe parasite load, or animals can get all kinds of different infections, or tuberculosis is a great example of one right now that you would not necessarily see ever in bison specifically as something that would be external. But if you brought that carcass in and for some reason it had, tuberculosis in the lungs, they would condemn that carcass and completely destroy it. And then there would be a probationary period for the farmer and potentially the butcher and all kinds of stuff like that. So again, that regulation is there to decrease the potential of sickness, but it's a fine line there between, where did you get these animals and how were you raising them, and who's condemning those, either that carcass or the organs. Prime example of this that we've had issues with is at a USDA facility, our local USDA facility. We had animals brought in and harvested with them, and I would not get my organs back. And I was like, no, I can sell the liver, I can sell the kidney, or I want to sell the heart. And they'd be like, no, we condemned those portions of the carcass. We condemned that. We decided that you could not sell that to folks. And I was like, really? Like, I'd love to see why, or can we have more of a conversation in regards to why that was? And interestingly enough, I was also getting not great cuts out of those animals too at the USDA facility. So I had an inkling that they didn't really know what to do with my animals specifically on the cutting floor. And when I brought my bison to another butcher, just a West Virginia certified butcher, I magically started getting all of my organs back. Now, why was that? So why did I all of a sudden I get all the liver and all of the heart back, and I get tongue and oxtail and all these things that I could never get from the USDA facility? And so that just seemed a little odd to me. So right. So there's regulation there, and you have to know the regulation in order to start questioning where they're really going for that, or what the options or opportunities are in between the regulations. Like I had mentioned earlier, bison is considered a non-amenable species, which is considered exotic according to the USDA, and they are only under voluntary inspection. Every type of meat does have to have some type of inspection in order to be sold commercially. But non-amenable species can be field harvested and still sold commercially, which we knew getting into the business, and that's part of the reason why I chose bison. Other examples of that are rabbits, deer, a couple different birds, and it's not on this list here, but I think goats actually are non-amenable as well. So you should be able to field harvest goats as well and sell them commercially. So you can field harvest a goat and still take it to a commercial processor to get all of your steaks out. That's an option, which is kind of nice. And then folks who raise birds or poultry, specifically chicken, there is a chicken poultry exemption, which I think I talk about on the next slide a little bit. Yeah, the poultry exemption actually allows you to home harvest up to 20,000 birds without any regulation, which is really interesting to me, because I feel like, okay, there was regulation, and then all of a sudden we went completely to the other side, and we don't regulate farms that do 20,000 birds. Have you ever seen 20,000 birds? That's a lot of birds. The theory there is that small animals and birds like that are not as highly regulated because they are not considered as much of a threat as a large animal is to human sickness and human consumption. So if I am harvesting 20,000 birds and 10 of them have salmonella, it only makes 10 families sick potentially. But if I harvest an entire carcass worth of beef, that could go to hundreds of households, and that could make hundreds of households sick. So they were trying to play a game there a little bit in regards to how many people could this meat make sick? Okay. And started making regulations from that perspective. So kind of like I was saying earlier, there are definitely regulations, and I think they were created with honest intention, but they kind of missed the mark in regards to what we're talking about in regards to humane slaughter. I'm not even going to go into what happens in some of these slaughter facilities. I can imagine, you can imagine, what happens in some of these facilities in regards to animals being stunned, not stunned appropriately. Are they dead? Are they not dead? And then they're being eviscerated and they're still bleeding out. All kinds of things happen. Pregnant animals, what happens then? It just has the potential to be absolutely horrific. And I don't think that it's fair. I have a really good example from, again, our animals that we used to bring to the slaughter facility. And you all may know, you may not know, what a lot of folks do with their animals, especially small animals, sheep, maybe goats, and sometimes pigs. They'll leave them at the facility. They'll bring them on a Wednesday, but kill day isn't actually until Friday. And so they leave them in pens at the facility to, be killed at the convenience of the owner of the slaughter facility when they can get to it on Friday. So first of all, bison are hard to contain to begin with. So I sure as heck wasn't going to leave them at a slaughter facility because they would never stick around. Um, and two, if you show up to a slaughter facility and you see the cows hanging out around the slaughter facility, or you see the pigs hanging out around the building, I mean, they're smart animals. They kind of get a sense of what's going on. They're not all super relaxed. It's slightly stressful. There are some people too that say, especially for cows, that smell of blood actually, starts to release all that cortisol into their system. So if you can imagine, cows that have cortisol in their system for days before they're even slaughtered, what that could potentially do to the meat, can be a big deal. There are very few studies out there in regards to what some of those hormones do to the meat. A lot of the studies have just been continuously referred back to, but because it's hard to get the same T-bone off of one animal and then off of another animal that wasn't stressed out, and then compare the meat. And then you have to do a side-by-side analysis. The ages have to be roughly the same. They have to be raised the same. And every animal is a little bit different. So it's kind of a tough one to study. But the theory behind that is that release of adrenaline and the extra cortisol that goes into the meat, into the animal system, can actually make that meat tougher and taint it in ways that are not necessarily palatable for us. It just doesn't make for a high quality meat. So if you're leaving animals at the slaughter facility for days, I mean, they're just releasing all those, all that adrenaline and all those chemicals into their muscles for days before the animal actually gets harvested. So what we had done originally is, I would show up with a trailer of a couple bison and say, my animals need to be shot directly after getting off of these trailers. So bison don't really trailer that well either. So unfortunately, most of the time, we'd pull up to the slaughter facility. They don't know where they are. They don't want to get out of the trailer. Then they have to be prodded out of the trailer into the alleyway to be shot, right? And I have had animals that stood there in the knock box and had to be shot 3 times in the head before they would drop to the ground. And I have had butchers who have been butchering and doing this business for decades come out to me and be like, I can't believe that animal stood there and looked at me. I had to shoot him 3 times in the head before he would go down. But that is the amount of adrenaline that is going through an animal's system. It's amazing. Again, this is my military background. It's kind of the human perspective too, how Marines can go out there and be shot multiple times without noticing it, but still kind of move forward in what they were doing on their job. And then they come back and their teammates like, oh my gosh, so you've been shot 3 times. It's amazing what adrenaline does to the body. And I also had one animal, he got himself so worked up, and unfortunately, the USDA facility we were using didn't have kind of that circular motion. It did have a corner, and I had a young animal run full speed into the wall, and he fractured his skull before he was put down. I could see the skull afterwards, and so I was like, no, this is not what I wanted to do anyways. I don't like the slaughter process. I really went, full speed and full court press at the West Virginia, ag department in regards to being like, no, we are going to field harvest these animals. This is not fair. These animals don't do well. And we're now able to field harvest our animals, which is great. And I highly encourage folks to do that with their animals because it's a lot less of a headache. You don't have to trailer them. You don't have to plan. They just, the sharpshooter shows up to your place and harvests the animals and then takes the carcass back and hangs it and potentially cuts it up for you. And you can decide who you want to do that. And I'm going to get into that here in just a couple of slides. I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but I've always liked this quote too, in regards to government, and it's something that I learned early on, especially because I was active duty military, and I am fully aware of what the government is capable of. But when government fears the people, there's liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. And so I encourage you to understand the government regulations surrounding what you do, because it will give you that fuel and that power to stand up for what you believe is right. And that's how the system is intended. And more of us, I feel like, just need to go out and be able to do that. So the secret here to processing your animals and field harvesting your own animals, but still selling them, is that you can use a custom processor, right? So you can field harvest your own animal. That's fine. You can field harvest your own animal and bring it to a custom processor instead of even a USDA or even a state certified processor. And you can get more than just wholes and halves out. So some of us who have been in the business, you're probably familiar with family members and friends who would just, buy a half cow from Mr. McDonald down the road who has his farm, and there's no regulation on that because it's just friends and he's not really selling it per se. He's calling it family, and he doesn't do it enough to make any money, and he doesn't put it down on paperwork anywhere. So there's no paper trail, right? So, but the theory is that you can do something similar to that and still sell it. You just have to know how to market it correctly. So basically where I'm going with this is that you sell wholes and halves, and you just deliver it in smaller boxes, quote unquote subscription boxes. So the customer doesn't have to have a giant freezer or commit to a giant space to store all that meat. So the creative marketing looks like this, right? So you can field harvest any animal, and it can be owned, most states say, by 4 people or 4 family units, right? So that means that animal can be broken down into quarters. And so you plan this ahead, right? Cow number 442 is going to go to the butcher, and it is, I'm going to sell it to these 4 people, or 4 family units, however you want to define family unit as well, wink, wink. And you are going to deliver their quarters in boxes, which now makes it a little bit easier for the consumer to digest, literally and figuratively. So basically, as an example here, a cow, these are estimated numbers, okay? So these are not perfect numbers in any way. It just I just did this out to show you guys an example. So the cow weighs 425 pounds, or gives you 425 pounds of meat. To purchase a whole cow, okay, you had Susie Smith from down the road and it's like, yeah, I want a whole cow. That's really easy, right? So $2,500 to purchase the whole cow. But she's like, I really want the whole cow, but I can't store the whole cow. So I guess I'll just keep getting my meat from, the grocery store down the road. And you're like, hold on a second. No, you can buy my whole cow, and I will bring it to you in 6 boxes, or you can come pick it up in 6 boxes. I'll have 7 pounds, or I'll have 70 pounds ready for you every month. Which you as the farmer can decide whether you want a monthly payment on that or a down payment and things like that. But basically it ends up being $416 per month for 70 pounds of meat, which is enough beef to feed a family of 4, 3 times per week for that month. I'd actually, it's almost enough to really feed a family of 5, 3 times a week, per month. And by buying the whole cow, they actually get it for less than $6 a pound. And I feel like that is the piece that resonates with people, because that's what's at the grocery store. At the grocery store, they see meat for sale by the pound, roughly by the pound, right? So that is your huge selling piece in regards to, you can get my meat for less than $6 a pound if we just creatively package it this way. So they get 70 pounds per month, and it only uses up, 3 cubic feet of a freezer space. And that's only about half the size of a standard kitchen refrigerator, So even if they didn't want to go buy a whole nother fridge, they can actually just put it in their kitchen space that they technically have now. Or you could make this even easier for them, right? Again, half the cow. Okay, let's use that as an example. So you have 2 family units who want to purchase this cow. And great, that's awesome. Still, there's 425 pounds of meat on that. We're going to sell our, half cow share, at $1,250. And they get 35 pounds of meat a month, right? So you're storing it for them. And that price breaks down to the same thing. It's only $208 per month, but that still is that less than $6 a pound piece of the puzzle that connects everything for that customer, right? And that's even less freezer space for them. That's a very small amount of space in your kitchen. And I feel like that's a little bit more digestible, for folks to wrap their brain around, doing a half cow and being like, okay, I could definitely, not only can I afford that, but that's also manageable because I can just put it in the refrigeration or freezer that I have at home currently. I don't have to worry about not having enough space for all of that.
Hey, Liz.
Yeah.
Can you, there's a question here. Can you repeat the family unit piece?
Yes. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I was hoping I was going to keep up with those chats, but, so the family unit piece. So there are a few states within the nation that do allow you to sell an animal in eighths. But that's few and far between. Most states allow you to sell an animal in fourths, as in the terminology from a legal perspective, which I will get to this here in a couple slides too, because I've worked with a lawyer on this, is 4 family units. So I don't care what your family unit is, right? I just need 4 signatures on a piece of paper, 4 names on a piece of paper for who's going to be getting this meat. Okay. So usually what an example of that is that a family unit ends up being a family and a friend, their neighbor, or my girlfriend and I go in on a quarter cow, right? But we're considered a family unit. That's kind of where I was going with that, if that makes a little bit more sense. It just gives you the opportunity for folks to get creative in their own mindset as well. Like, I'm selling this to you as a family unit, but if you want to call your family unit you and your friend, great. So I see your other question here. Documentation is what you give to the butcher or someone else. So this is the documentation you have for you as a business that you sold this animal like that. The butcher doesn't care. He's just going to cut it up. He doesn't care who you sold it to. He's just going to cut it up however you want to. The documentation is for you. In the case that the state comes back and is like, excuse me, ma'am, you're selling quarter cows commercially that are field harvested. That's not allowed. And you're like, actually it is, because I'm selling it by family units and you have all that documentation. So that's just for you. Honestly, you don't necessarily have to show that to anybody. It's just the bookkeeping aspect of it, to make sure that if somebody were to ask you questions, you could prove to them that, yes, I did sell cow number 442 to 4 family units September of last year, when they start asking those questions. So I hope that answers that, Shay. And I have another example of this here in my next slide with pigs, right? So same idea. Again, you've got a hog, you can do a half hog share. The issue is that if you didn't come from rural America, buying a whole or half hog is like, no, I'm not doing that. That's way too much meat. There's no way. One, I'm going to pay for that. Two, I'm going to store that. And you're like, actually, this is how we do our half hogs, or at the previous slide, this is how we do our half cows. You know, I'm going to sell it to you for this price. You can decide whether you want to deposit on that, or if you want to do monthly payments, fine. You sign here that you own either half or a quarter of this hog. And you kind of go from there. And again, the marketing piece of this is telling these customers that you're getting this meat for less than $6-7 a pound. And it is, non-GMO, field harvested, humane, all of this stuff. And they're getting it for that price tag because they're committing to that animal. And you just have to do a little bit of the storage piece is the big part of it. So a couple other ways that I have found that you can do this as well, besides just selling in halves and quarters, is you could get as fancy as setting up a food church. There's a couple of people locally that do that and do that very well and have written books on it. So this photo is actually the cover of the book by Needy Bali, who set up a 501c3 food church and called the Farm to Fork Meat Riot, because basically churches are exempt from a lot of rules and regulations. And so if you just set it up as kind of like a club, you're almost setting up like a buyer's club. You're technically then selling a membership to a club, and you're not actually selling any meat. You're selling a membership, and whatever happens within that membership is kind of up to the membership. And these books go through that. The other one here is John Moody, who set up a food club, and he has a club and co-op handbook that he wrote. And that one is super simple. You can go onto his website, and I think it's like 25 pages long. It's not even that big. But he set this up in Kentucky. Goodness, where was it? Not Louisville, but I think it is Louisville, just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. And he's been doing it for decades now and has been super successful with it. I mean, I think his food club out there in Kentucky, I mean, he sees millions of dollars come through that food club every year. It's amazing, like how big it is. But it's one of those things where he charges for a membership, and then they just, collect the food, the meat, whatever you wanted to do. You could just do a meat food club if you wanted to. And then you can basically do whatever you want and however you want to harvest that meat and have it cut up. You can basically do it without any regulation if you set up your food church or food club appropriately. And so these books go through that very specifically on how to do that. So those are really, really cool reads. Both of these folks have websites that you can jump onto as well to kind of hear their story and thumb through it and see if the idea, potentially resonates with you. But it's just another way to use Loopholes to get your meat processed and sold. It takes a little bit of work, in the beginning to kind of digest all of this and set it up and get it going the way you want to do it. But then when you get to field harvest your animals and you're truly doing the best thing you can for your animals and your customers, it just feels so good. And it feels great to be connected to a community in that way. You're doing the right thing, you're doing the good thing. And you just had to do a little bit of extra research to make sure that you could utilize those loopholes to your advantage. That's fine. The regulations are there, but the loopholes are there too, for you to use. And a lot of the group that really helped me take that last final step in regards to getting the Honest Carnivore out there was the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund. They are a fund and group set up to protect, defend, and broaden the rights and viability of independent farmers. And that's who I got some of that legal help from. I was like, look, I see these loopholes. I want to make sure I'm understanding them correctly for exactly what I want to do. And I want to make sure I have support for that. So you do have to purchase a membership to be a part of the fund. And I think it's about $200, maybe $250 a year. But with that, you get legal guidance. I had a gentleman up in Pennsylvania sit down with me via Zoom, I should say, and walk me through, yes, you can do these things. He's the one specifically who told me that he would stick with the quarters aspect, you know, an animal being owned by only 4 family units, and he specified family unit, right? And said, yes, that is all legal. And the other really nice thing too is if somebody does come to your door, unannounced or announced too, you can call the Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund and get on the phone with them and be like, hey, the West Virginia State Department of Food and Poultry is here to inspect me and are asking a bunch of questions about how I field harvested all these animals. What do I say? So they help you right there on the spot. And this Farm to Consumer Legal Defense Fund is really what finally gave me the courage to be like, okay, yes, I can do this. You know, like I said, I was active duty military. I am a law abiding citizen. You know, I love the United States. I love this nation. I think we have a good government in place. We could do better in a lot of places. But you know, it's big. It's too big for itself sometime. And that's where small farmers like us can get lost in it unless we can get creative with how to utilize these loopholes. You know, there are rules out there for everything, you know, but you got to understand what the rule is and then how to move forward from there. And this legal defense fund really gave me the courage to definitely move ahead with that. You know, Camus Davis, yeah, she gave me the business sense and the business guidance in regards to this is something people want. This is something people actually do. It's been done all over the nation. But the legal defense fund is who actually gave me the courage to be like, yes, legally, Liz, you can do this and we will support you in doing this. And so I feel like that's part of the reason why I'm here today to tell you that there are loopholes and encourage you to look into them a little further, because you'd be surprised how humane and transparent you can keep your operation by getting a little bit creative with your marketing. You know, that's really all it is understanding what the customer wants and how to kind of tailor that ever so slightly, you know, to what you want to do on your farm. So yeah, I didn't take up nearly as much time as I thought I was going to here with this 90-minute session, but I really am passionate about building a community and decentralizing our meat. You know, I feel like that is the answer moving forward in regards to some of the issues we have in factory farming. You know, we're not going to be able to compete with the factory farm industry unless more small farmers like myself, like Carrie on here, get into the business and offer customers a better meat source, you know? So I'm here to encourage you to do that and give you a little bit of guidance in where you could potentially utilize the loopholes to your advantage and, you know, make some good money farming, you know, because I want you to make some good money. So that's what it's all about. You gotta keep it up for generations in order for it to be sustainable. So any other questions? I'm going to just look back through in this chat box and see if I have anything else that was super confusing to folks, or something else that I can clarify at all. I don't know. Anything?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So one of the producers that I work with, they will have, because you can field harvest an animal and send it to a local butcher, for personal consumption.
Mhm.
And one thing that they're doing is they will have come out and actually harvest the animal themselves and then just take it directly off the property and take it to the butcher.
Mhm.
And so I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that, and if there was any, is that fine to do, or are there
Yeah,
any?
definitely.
Yeah.
Yes, that is totally fine to do. Yeah. If you have those customers who want to come up to your farm and do that, awesome. Again, it kind of depends on location wise, how many customers you can get that want to do that. And is that going to make your business viable? Can you have a viable business where all of your customers come out and do that? Awesome. That is great. And I wish you could send some of those customers to me. So, but that is most definitely legal. If they come up and if they harvest that animal, that's fine. There just needs to be that paperwork though, because you did own that animal. So there has to be a transfer of ownership at some point. So that's where I would encourage you to still get at least a paperwork trail. Since you are a business, a legal entity, you do have to have a paperwork trail in regards to selling that animal to somebody else before it is made into steaks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just your letterhead and cow or animal number 442 sold to these people. Great. They sign it and then they can do whatever they want with that animal. So keep it simple.
So
Anything else?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
So could you in theory do a transfer of ownership like that? I guess it wouldn't matter either way, but if you did a transfer of ownership while the animal was live, but then you still were the one to harvest it and take it to the butcher. But I guess it doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah, it doesn't matter because they own that animal at that point. And basically, whether they harvest the animal, fine, that's easy because they, like you were originally saying, I think the way I was understanding it, if they come up and they harvest it and take the quarters back, that's all them. But it's the same thing in regards to if they own the animal and then you are just helping to facilitate how the animal is put down, processed, and packaged. That then becomes your job. Like that's you're just helping them facilitate that. They own that animal, but they came to you to help with those other pieces. It's kind of like how I run my butchery classes, right? So when we do chickens or pigs, like in this photo right here, these folks owned those chickens and I was just facilitating, how they prep them. So, but on paperwork, they own the chickens. They can do whatever they want with the chickens because they own it. So, yeah. That's why that's why the transfer of ownership is important. That's the important piece, is that you do have to have that piece of paper saying that, this person did own this animal. So, yeah. I hope that helps. Carrie, you had a question.
Yeah, so I know that you field harvest your bison and then you take it to a slaughter facility. So what is the procedure for that? Because I know you're selling those commercially.
Yes,
do you have
definitely.
to have a vet come out, or what's the deal?
So the state of West Virginia does come out to watch the animal be field harvested. So just because we had a really good relationship with my butcher and just continued to use that same butcher, and he is state certified instead of just a custom processor. So we went down the path in regards to our animals are field harvested because they are a non-amenable species. But like what happens in the slaughter facility, there is an inspector there on site while all these animals are being killed, to make sure that it is being done humanely, right? That they are basically being put down in one shot is what it's really, really all about. And the animal comes and is not bleeding and is not lame. So that inspector, that same inspector that would have been at the slaughterhouse, comes to my property in the morning
Okay.
to look at that animal. And he's like, yep, this animal is the animal you are going to take a shot on. Is not lame. It is not bleeding. It looks sound and healthy. It gets up and moves around the way that it should be moving around. And then my butcher, who's also a sharpshooter, puts that animal down in one shot. So,
Okay.
yeah. So we have been fortunate enough to do that with the state. But like I said, that took me 3 years to get the state on board with that. So,
Okay.
and what I wish I had done was this 3 years ago and just been like, look, I'm field harvesting all of my animals and getting them custom processed. But I was just learning about all of this.
Right.
So we already have this system in place, which luckily works okay. And the state of West Virginia knows me very, very well. So in a good way, honestly. I mean, it is in a good, I don't want to piss anybody off. When you start pissing people off and making people angry around what you're doing, you know, they're more willing to shut you down or to look into your paperwork and stuff. I don't advocate for any of that, you know. I am a rule follower, right? But I also recognize that there are loopholes that I am definitely going to use to my advantage. And I'm going to prove to you that I can do that. But I'm going to do it smiling and nicely.
Yes.
So right. So I do have a good working relationship with the state of West Virginia, but they definitely know my name and they definitely know where I'm going with this and what I want to do in the future. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Anybody else have some questions? You guys pretty good? It's a lot of information to kind of take in. So I really just encourage you to at least take some of this and start, you know, thumbing through it yourselves. And like I said, my information is all on the Honest Carnivore website, and you can definitely email me, get in touch with me with this fun Hoova app that we've got going on, and yeah, kind of go from there. And I think this is all recorded, right? Isn't this recorded?
Yes.
Please. Yeah. Okay.
I also had a question.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question about pricing. So I know you showed kind of those examples of kind of the breakdown in terms of like, things like a kind of like in a box, for example, like per month and then XYZ.
Yeah.
And I know you kind of mentioned these as estimates for both kind of the whole and half cow and then half hog. Just curious to like, you know, you mentioned 3 years and then you're specifically doing bison, and curious if and how your prices have fluctuated in those 3 years. And are you, I think, for example, one, if they fluctuated, and then 2, how you kind of cover costs in terms of processing and service costs in setting your pricing.
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. We put up our price list for our bison cuts over 3 years ago, and I think I've made 2 edits to it. I did a lot of research into the industry in regards to what you know, the meat was going for, so I was pretty well versed in what my options were and what the market could potentially capture as well. If anything, I could probably raise my prices, but I just sell out is what I do instead, which is fine. So these prices all came from a mix of farmers that I work with that are anywhere from the organic side to, you know, just kind of like, you know, the backyard farmer that only has a couple cows. So it's kind of like the in between right here is where those prices specifically come. But yes, most definitely when I price out this cow, this purchase price of $12.50 does include like the processing. I don't know if I'm probably not saying that well, but that is what the farmer makes back. Like I guess your question is probably referring to some people say, I want to buy a full cow, and the farmer's like, yeah, this is what the cow costs, but you have to pay for the processing price. That is the processing price is included here in these infographics. And these infographics are available on the Honest Carnivore website under my For Farmers tab. You can see all of these and you can download them and look at them. But that slaughter price is already included in that share. It would not be this plus ton the consumer. They also have to pay the butcher. No, this is the whole thing. I'm trying to make it really easy for the consumer, right? Because the consumer is already a little like, I don't know, half a cow is a lot. So we got to keep it simple. And by keeping it simple and offering them a quote unquote subscription service, which is what people are a little bit more familiar with nowadays, you get to utilize these loopholes. So yeah, does that answer that question?
Yeah, just wanting to to clarify, because kind of similar to Shay, like working with farmers or different producers, I feel like a lot of folks have questions around pricing and how to set an adequate price, including their own costs to the butcher. So like, if I know I have my own costs and I know I need to sell this, like how can I cover that, but then also pay myself back, but then also have a affordable price for, consumers. So
exactly.
Just curious how one sets that up, and then also if there has been changes. I mean, there's always market fluctuations or whatever, but I'm going to go back to answering that question from the perspective of my bison, right? So when I set my prices for my individual cuts for my bison, like I do sell a steak and things like that. Everything goes into that. Not only what that animal cost me, but what did it cost me to feed? What did it cost me to vet? What does it cost me to process it too? Right. So I know all of the costs it costs me to get an animal to 2 years of age, 5 years of age, things like that. And then I take, a little bit of the in between there, and that's how I set my prices. But my prices are set based on all of the inputs. Okay. So, because I want to make sure that it's a price tag that I can live with as a farmer, and that makes me money to keep going. So, yeah, but I don't want to confuse the consumer either. Like I want to make sure like my price is my price. There's no like hidden fees for butchery and slaughtering and packaging and all this stuff. You don't want to do that. I feel like that's really, I don't know. I feel like that's a little bit confusing to people. So I encourage you to do that work up front and then present the consumer with a nice flat rate. And so that's what these infographics are on. So also another question, how are consumers, I guess, getting the meat? Is it like a pickup? Is there a drop off? Also curious.
Up to you.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be up to you. That's up to you. If you want them to come to your farm store and pick it up, fine. If you want to drop it off at their house because they're neighbors or they live next to the school your kids go to, fine. You could do it. You could do it either way. It's just the fact that you have a box of meat for them, however they want to come up and get it is up to you. Yeah. So. Good question, though. Yes, please do.
I have more of a comment and maybe topic of discussion. But I appreciated what you said earlier with, having these kind of labels of organic and certified humane, and that not really, what does that mean and how are you connected to the animal still? And I know, with organic, that animal has to be sent to a USDA certified organic facility, which are really limited. And when you're talking about local meat production, there's also just like a lack of USDA facilities in general, because even meat that is locally raised still has to be sent on a truck hours away to be slaughtered, and then and then it comes back to be sold locally. So it's just kind of funny. I still think it is probably less of a carbon footprint than just buying whatever random meat at the grocery store. But the other issue as well, I live in kind of a rural area, and we only have one butcher. And I know there are really long kind of wait lists for getting animals butchered and processed. Is that an issue that you're facing at all?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, there's bottlenecking all over the place. So, I mean, I do live somewhere where I do have a couple options an hour in both directions. But and I recognize that that's not everybody's case, but there's always a line. Like there's definitely gonna, unless you can book them at different or book them ahead of time, there's potentially still a significant line there. And I guess, is your butcher, is that a state certified butcher? Is that a USDA butcher, or is that a custom butcher?
Just a custom.
Custom. Okay. So the closest that you have is custom, and he's already booked up, you're saying, or pretty booked. So the one benefit to that butcher, if you field harvest these animals, is that the animal is already put down. And potentially, if you're using a custom processor too, what you can also do to help that workload is it can be field harvested, skinned, and eviscerated, and you just bring him a carcass. And you can, then it's less load. It's you probably just need some place for it to hang, right? The carcass has to hang because it has to age for a certain period of time. And then your butcher has all of the machinery and space to actually cut it up into steaks. A lot of people don't have a clean space to be able to do that and vacuum seal and put, the stickers on the packaging that don't come off and things like that. So by having that conversation with your butcher, I bet you that the fact that he just has to cut up the meat is only half the work, right? Because you did half the work for him. So that should open him up a little bit if you're able to have those conversations, and if you're able to do that, or have somebody locally who can help you come out and put the animal down and properly, skin it and eviscerate it and things like that. There are definitely, it's an art form in doing all of that stuff. I feel like a lot of people don't recognize that, which is, again, part of those butchery classes. But it only takes a few times to really get your hands on it and learn how that works. And then you become pretty good at it yourself. Because the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then a carcass is a carcass, and then you bring that to the butcher, and that's what they process into all your steaks and stuff. So you just did half the work. And it was probably a great learning experience to do that too, and it kind of brings you full circle there. So I'd encourage you to maybe have that conversation with your butcher in regards to, you do have to work for him, but you bring in the carcass. So it's definitely a conversation. So does that help, Shay?
Yeah. Is that, I guess in the sense of alleviating some of that work, has it been your experience that reduces the cost at all?
Yeah, you won't have a kill fee. So whatever that cost is, like when you bring your animal to the butcher, they should itemize exactly what it costs to have it, stuffed into packages of ground meat versus what your kill fee is versus, what your hang weight is and things like that. So because I, like on my cut sheets, I know like they charge different prices to stuff ground bison into 10-pound packages versus 1-pound packages, right? So it all adds up for them is what it is. Basically, they're just showing you that it takes a lot more effort to put 300 pounds in 1-pound packages versus 300 pounds into 30 packages. So they definitely should be itemizing that. And you'll probably only save the cost of the kill fee, honestly. So, and okay, I should also say the kill fee, and they have to do something with those organs if you don't keep them. So there should be a fee there too to dispose of some of that. And if they don't have a disposal fee too, you should save on that as well. So I would encourage you to look at your bill from your butcher, or if they don't itemize it, ask them to itemize it, and then you can make a decision in regards to how much you could potentially save. The other thing I feel like I should mention from this aspect too is that, to be honest with you, you could do all of this yourself and just bypass the butcher. But You would just have to have the space to do that, right? You could field harvest the animal and sell it all in steaks yourself. If you are comfortable with putting the animal down, skinning it, eviscerating it, you have a place to hang it appropriately, where it can age, and then you have the space and the equipment to vacuum seal it and butcher it yourself. You could do all of that yourself and sell it like this, like I'm saying. You could do all of that. I feel like I should probably mention that in a presentation next time, but most people don't have the time or the space to do that, or a big enough freezer or refrigeration space to hang a carcass so appropriately. But if you do, or you know somebody who does, you could just do it all. So, food for thought. So, yeah.
I also have another question. I don't know if anybody does. But I'm just curious too, if you could talk a little bit about your collective, because I know you're hosting classes and like the carcass classes and also like the field harvest, but kind of on the same lens of bottlenecks, but on the other perspective from processing and finding processors. But I guess the bottlenecks of like starting a collective, and you mentioned maybe being in year 3 or maybe doing it for 3 years, but yeah, what are some of the bottlenecks you've experienced in navigating of how trying to build a collective and getting to where you are getting to now? I'm sure, we're always learning, but to where you are.
Gosh, yes. Yeah. So interestingly enough, I don't have any bottlenecking at the processing facility because I bypass that with my butchery classes, right? So the animals are field harvested and are skinned and eviscerated. And then the folks who buy the class, so they come in, you can, again, look at this on the website, for example, to take home and learn how to cut up half of a pig. We charged a family unit $385 to do that, right? So and that completely bypassed it bypassed the whole slaughterhouse. That animal never was part of any of that. We did that all ourselves. I did have a local butcher at the time, master butcher, who didn't have his own shop, and a chef who helped me out with that for that specific class. And so when you talk about bottlenecking, if you can run a collective and offer butchery classes, it completely skips the entire thing, so but that only works with certain animals, right? Like it's really hard to put an entire cow on a butcher block and run a class, even with half a cow. You have to we're still working on that from the butchery class meat collective perspective, but it's easy to do with a lamb or half a pig or a chicken or a turkey or a rabbit or a goat. You could totally do that because you can do that in a one-room space. And I bought a bunch of butcher blocks, brought it to a restaurant one day. The chef cooked me up some jowl bacon, and the master butcher, helped us all take all the loins off of the pig. It was awesome. And those people, those family units, took that half a pig carcass home with them. And I actually ended up being able to harvest 3 pigs that way just for that one class. Right. So as we get this meat collective up and going a little bit more now here, and like meat collectives around the nation, especially in Chicago, I mean, they go through animals every other week. They're doing 3, 6 animals in a class every other week. And I mean, think about how many farmers that's helping out. And like that is taking all of those animals out of the processing bottleneck. I completely skipped it, so I'm telling you a way how you can do this with your animals and potentially still use a processor. But if you want to go as far as the meat collective, you can do the whole thing, and make a lot of money to show people how to butcher that too. So I feel like my biggest issues with the meat collective is finding the space to host a class, because it has to be clean, it has to be big enough. And whoever has the space has to be willing to have blood and guts on the ground. So then that's hard. Like, where's a clean space that I can actually put blood and guts on the ground, right? So that's interesting. So we have been fortunate enough to work with some really wonderful local restaurateurs who are like, yeah, put the half a pig in my walk-in, not a problem, we'll use it tomorrow, you know, like for your classes, like that's not a big deal. So chickens, again, that's a little bit easier, they're way smaller, but when you start getting as big as, you know, a goat or a lamb, or I'm sorry, a goat or a pig, you know, then you have to, you know, find the right space to do that. But we've done it at restaurants, you know, we've done the chicken classes, just, you know, that's just at the farm, you know, and then we did our bison class, because again, that's a little bit tougher, you know, to put a whole carcass down and, you know, start being able to take all the primals off of that. That's just that's a really heavy animal, similar to what a cow is. But we did a field harvest class and like carcass prep. So we did that just at the farm. And then we actually were using that bison for a bison roast. So then we just put the entire bison on a spit for that. So you do have to get a little bit creative with where you host your classes. You know, if you want to get into the meat collective thing, that's the big thing, because you got to have enough space, a clean space, and probably a sink. So, which you can do on the farm. You just have to be careful, because sometimes of the year it's really hot, sometimes of the year it's really cold, sometimes of the year you get flies, and you don't want flies in your meat, so you got to have fans around. I mean, we could get into all the nitty-gritty details about, you know, setting up, you know, your own butchery meat collective business as well. I feel like that could be a whole nother presentation. But that's also the piece that if you go to goodmeatproject.org, that's what Camus Davis also walks you through a little bit of as well, you know, in regards to this is the business of hosting butchery classes, and these are my recommendations surrounding that. And so she's helped me a lot with that. But it's getting that space. And at our farm, specifically at Riffle Farms, we're working on outfitting our barn a little bit better to be able to host more of those classes, as well as dinner events and things like that. But, you know, a concrete floor, putting in a bathroom, not just a porta potty, and some plumbing and stuff and things like that, because we kind of just started doing this just over a year ago with the meat collective thing, and we really are committed to doing it, and want to bring some more farmers on board and help with that bottlenecking. And so we're really going to hit it hard here this next year in regards to being able to do that and have our own space to do that. But yeah, so there's options. So, well, now it looks like I'm almost out of time. We almost took up the 90 minutes, ladies. Good job. So anybody else have questions? I could sit here and talk about this all day, honestly. So maybe I grab a glass of wine, but yeah, we could continue this.
I think, Shay, did you have a question? I saw you come up off mute, but yeah, please. If you have a last one.
No more questions. Thank you so much. This was really insightful.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys listening to my babbling. So.
Yeah, Liz, how can we, I know you mentioned the website, but yeah, and is your contact information also all on the Honest Carnivore website?
It is. It's all on there. I'm actually going to put that in the chat box right now because I realized I didn't really put it on my slides. So it's thehonestcarnivore.com, and then my email is that. So, and then our farm too. So it's the bison. So, but all things meat related are going to be on thehonestcarnivore.com. Yeah. You guys will come through. And like I said, there is a farmer section specifically on that website that has all of this information, all the podcasts, people I think you should know, the books I was talking about earlier. It's all right there on that website to digest. So, yeah.
Yeah. Can you, what's like upcoming for you, or what are you working on next?
Yeah. We were thinking of hibernating a little bit this winter, but
only a little bit.
I know, right? But we're just gonna do farmers markets here for the rest of the winter, honestly, just because it's already started snowing. Wow. Yeah, which the bison love. Right. But it's just not super conducive to having events at the farm. So we're gonna, kick it hard back in April, having events on the farm and things like that, and restarting our classes. We were going to do a turkey class next week. But the farmer I was going to use to do that, she's basically sold out of turkeys. So, which is great for her, but that just means that I can't host a class. So that's all right. Next year we'll plan ahead and do that. But yeah, just going to be farmers markets for the rest of the year. And come April though, man, we're gonna, get all this going back pretty hard. Farm to table dinners, we do tours, we do events, we do camping, we do butchery classes. So yeah.
Sounds like we all need to come to West Virginia to come visit.
Please do. That'd be lovely. So awesome. Well, thanks guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of the conference. So this is all good stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Liz.
Right.
I see some folks coming up, but yeah, be in touch if anything on WFN's end for you. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. It was cool. So all right.